Great. Thanks, Tom. Thanks very much to Rosa. Everyone has said this, but I want to just add to thanks to Rosenthal and Amy and everyone who's put this conference together. It's fantastic, and I'm really delighted to be here. I want to kind of talk, so we're all doing something a little bit different, and we'll come together and talk about whatever you like to talk about, some of Tom's points that he made at the start. But I want to talk a little bit about an aspect of ethics, journalism ethics, related to change, which is what I'm most interested in. A little closer. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's better. Ooh, scary. Which is the way that ethics are appropriated, sometimes appropriately, I think, and sometimes not, as a defensive mechanism of resistance to change. So kind of controversial as well. Not as controversial probably as what John had to say, but see what you think about this. So I want to suggest, and I do hope we'll get to talk about this, that journalists in particular tend to use, I'm sorry about that, they tend to use ethics as a kind of a boundary marker. So we use that as a way to distinguish the familiar, the thing that we know and the ethics of doing it that we understand, from the unknown and the things that are accompanied by some amount of fear because we don't know very much about them. And when we do that, I think we tend to couch that in ethical terms. So when we define who we are and what we do, and actually John's a good setup for this because he kind of talked about this. We tend to say, well, we do these things because we're journalists and because we have this sort of sense of what journalism ethics is, which is fine. But the problem, I think, is that when we do that, we tend to look at every single new thing that comes along as this terrible, terrible challenge to our ethical standards that we start with resistance, which is kind of the point of what I want to talk about today. And I think that comes in two flavors. I think it comes in terms of the people who are, in fact, doing that new thing are not journalists. So that's one flavor. Therefore, because they're not upholding the standards that we uphold, that's one flavor. And the other thing is that we are going to have to do that new thing. You know, we can see it coming. We're going to have to do that new thing. And when we do, it will compromise our ethical standards. So I think that journalists tend to react that way. And I want to go through some examples, which are totally cherry-picked, but examples of things that journalists say. And then I want to toss out there the sense that I'm a strong believer in the need and the centrality of ethical standards in whatever kind of environment we're in, but that automatic reaction is kind of an overreaction, and it's starting to get on my nerves. And in addition to starting to get on my nerves, I think that a better approach would be to say, here's this new thing that's coming along. And to think from the start about how we can take our ethical sensibilities and adapt to it. So that's what I want to kind of throw some quotes out there at you and talk about a little bit. Starting from a more proactive stance instead of a reactive stance to saying this doesn't fit, so it's not going to work for us. So I'm going to take this chronologically with some of the quotes over the years that some of the people in the room have gathered from journalists, things that just journalists have said have been quoted. Yes, I am cherry picking here. There certainly are many, many journalists, all of you, and many other journalists besides who have been vocal from the very start with new things that come along and their excitement about that and their commitment to doing it well and doing it in ethical ways. Nonetheless, I would suggest that some of the quotes on the screen are not, yes, they are cherry-picked from some of the research, but they are not unique in the way that journalists have reacted to some new things. Going back, you can go back before the internet, but we'll start with the internet in the interest of time here. So I've got some quotes on the slide on the screen, if you can see them all that well. But basically what journalists said when the internet came along is, well, it's obviously a very quick medium. It emphasizes speed. That's going to be a problem because how are we going to get it right if we're really focused on getting it out there quickly? We used to have this ability to think about, to verify the information, to think about whether it's right or not. Now that's going to go away. There's a lot of false information out there, so that raises some accountability issues. How are we going to be accountable for all this information? How are we going to possibly deal with the volume of it? There's issues about the kind of the overall public service norm that this is a detriment to an informed public. For instance, because you can be very focused on what you're interested in and ignore everything else. Concerns that we still hear today. And then the last one, another concern we still hear today, it's been exacerbated, of course, by web analytics and traffic data, that we're just not going to, we're going to be so hungry for an audience. Now we know who that audience is. We're going to be servants to them. So these were concerns that came up. Most of these quotes are from the 1990s. So these were concerns that came up right at the start with online journalism. Next we had a trend toward multimedia, convergence. I kind of lumped those together. So the idea, which of course has continued on, that but these quotes that I'm giving you are particularly coming out of the sort of the dot-com bubble era. So there was a response in news organizations to have journalists do more things, as you'll recall, those of you who lived through it. So it was a trend toward everyone producing content across platforms, so print journalists shooting video and so on. It seems so obvious now, but that was a big deal 10 years ago. So these are some of the reactions to that. So I went to J school to be a journalist, not to be a multimedia person, not to be a TV person, not to multitask. I can still hear, this is a quote from one of my studies, I can still hear this guy. He was just seething. He was seething. I've never liked TV journalism. I always thought it was abhorrent. It's a subspecies. He went on. His quote went on for a while. There's time constraints. I have to rush to the newsroom. I can't stay and do the real reporting because I got to rush back and I got to edit my video and I got to do all this other stuff. It seems so innocent and simple now, but this was a concern when it first came along 10 years ago. A time constraint. A concern about it being more entertainment oriented, and so that's going to be a problem. Then we have bloggers. I'm not going to go on forever with this, but to give you, it's the reaction every time is the point that I'm trying to make here. So then we have bloggers. So again, early 2000s, we're now into early to mid 2000s. It was the rise of the blog as a kind of much more dominant media form. So now we have this clear attempt to draw lines in the sand, right? Lines in the cyber sand. I'm a real journalist because I follow certain ethical guidelines, and those bloggers, those horrible people in their pajamas, that's the stereotype, right? They don't do those things. So it's vanity journalism. Look at me, I can post. Isn't this great? Well, that doesn't make you a journalist, sorry. Bloggers publish because they hear something from someone who's reliable. That's not good enough. Blogging is just hype dished out by the unemployable to the aimless. I mean, there were lots of quotes like it. Great. I mean, they're very, very articulate quotes, but that was a large part. The response until journalists themselves started really getting seriously into blogging, and then things changed, which is also my point, which I'll get to at the end. That last one, by the way, is a quote from a writer at Advertising Age, who was declaring essentially, it was from a longer piece, that there was no commercial future in new media forms such as blogs. And sadly, some publishers seem to believe that, so that kind of led them astray a bit. User-generated content, I'm going to fly through because I don't want to take up all the time on the quotes. You get the idea. So late 2000s, now we're wrestling with mostly comments at this stage, and then more consternation about that. It's not factual, it's not trustworthy. How can we check it out? They're not professionals, they're not journalists. You can see the theme here. And then the last one of these that I have, because you do clearly see the theme and get the idea, is social media. So bringing us kind of more or less up to today, although this morning we've already gone on well past that and raised other issues as well. And again, there have been many positive reactions, but there also have been quite a few negative ones, and I'm picking some of those out. So ethical terms again. So Twitter users, Facebook users, whatever, they do these things, but we, the real journalists, kind of what John was alluding to, we don't do them. There's all these quacks, there's all this junk out there. We disseminate news that's reliable. Reliance on Twitter and Facebook is throwing the door open to everyone, and that's a terrible thing. So you get the idea. This has been a common theme for 20 years now, as each new technology has come along, and it was a theme actually to some extent before it with other new technologies, but again, starting just with the internet here. And so I want to suggest, I've got two more slides, that we kind of draw a deep breath here, which again, you as an audience, you're way past there, but a lot of your colleagues are not necessarily past there. I do think there's a value. Clearly, there's a value. We're kind of all here talking about it in revisiting our foundational norms and thinking deeply about them and thinking about our values and thinking about why we hold them. There is a reason. They do serve a fundamental purpose. Credibility is what we have. If we lose that, then we really don't have any value. So it's not that I'm arguing against having ethics by any means, or having these values, or even articulating these values as new things come along. I think there's a value in that. And yet, when we look back now, I mean, some of those quotes just seem silly, because when you look back now from a not very distant perspective, a couple of years in some cases, you can argue, I would argue, that every single one of those changes has ultimately given us better journalism, better examples of what I think we probably would all agree is some pretty fine journalism that's reached more people, it's been more accessible, it's been more effective, it's been more, whatever you define as being more engaging, whatever you define as being good journalism, these tools have enabled us to do not just good journalism, but in fact better journalism, I would argue, than we might have been able to do without them. Tom, among other people, but certainly Tom has been saying early and often that the crisis we're going through, have been going through, and seem to be coming out of to some extent now, it's a financial crisis. It's not a journalistic crisis. It's a financial crisis. And so I think what we've tended to do in responding to these technologies is that we've kind of been mistaking the effect for the cause. The effect, that the cause of these ethical breaches, and you can point to many ethical breaches and concerns, the cause, I would argue, is not the internet or multimedia or bloggers or social media. It's a lack of resources for dealing with it. It's an economic cause. And so I think we're making kind of a logical mistake there. And I think we're going to keep making it until we get to not just digital first, but flexibility first. And until we can do that, we're going to keep losing a lot of time on angst that could be more productively used. Okay, my last slide, just to take one example of social media, which, again, I'm kind of preaching to the choir in this room, but not necessarily in this industry. I've seen the future, and it's mutual. Alan Rusberg at the Guardian, very forward-thinking journalist, and we need a lot more editors like him. But look at all the benefits. Look at all the ways that we have actually, as we've gotten into using social media and have figured out how to use them well, we've actually strengthened our ethics. We've got, if you look at some of the verification policies of organizations like the Associated Press, they've got like a 9-step thing on top of their normal thing that they do in verifying information to verify information for social media. They're making more certain, in fact, that what they've got is credible before they put it out there. Obviously, the diversity of views, we all talk about that and know about that, and it's real. There are more views, there's more information getting out there because of this technology. The speed, the tips, the insights, we're getting great stuff. And then the last two, which I think are really important, is that there is, in fact, more accountability and there's more transparency, something that, again, Tom, Jay, I know, is here, and a whole lot of other people have talked about, the importance of being accountable, the importance of being transparent, the importance of telling people what you do. Sylvia's point, absolutely, earlier on, well, we're actually more so than we were before, not less so. So I'll stop there. That's my last slide. Thanks for your patience, and I hope we can talk about all these things. Thank you.